Hi, I'm Tom at Just One Pack, and this is AC on the Short Alpha Clash podcast, where I'll talk all things Alpha Clash on my way to work. Now, loads of different things we could be talking about this week, so I'm not going to run out of content anytime soon. There are the news about PvE. There is the audiobook is out. There is more interesting tidbits from Progenitors Gambit. There is news about the next set, and also a bit of news about what we have not heard about. Loads and loads of things, but what I want to talk about is awakenings. So let's dig into that. So if you don't know, I am based in Europe, mainland Europe. And next weekend, or the upcoming weekend, is the first ever awakening in Europe. It is not mainland Europe though. It's happening in the UK, and I'm going. I hope to see as many Europeans, or at least Brits, there as we can possibly muster. But there's a few interesting things about awakenings in general that sort of piqued my curiosity in the past week. So one of the things is the size of this. In one of the podcast or pod videos, vlogs, I don't know, from the guys behind the Awakening in the UK, they were talking about how many participants they were expecting. That made me think, what is a normal awakening? And there is no good way to find this information, but the way I approached it was on alphaclasstcd.com's event site. You can see how many has enrolled for the different awakenings. And if I went back and took awakenings that was already done and over, and so I looked at what level of participation there was, not in terms of numbers, right? Then an awakening is somewhere between 8 and 12. That's the typical size of an awakening. That pretty much matches my own playgroup. We're a bit small on that, but it pretty much matches that, and the guys behind the UK Awakening, which, by the way, is happening in the Leaky Teacup in Redford, the most unlikely of places, but I love it. The guys behind that, they were guesstimating maybe 15 or 16 participants in the Awakening UK, which would put it in sort of the big league in terms of size. I don't know if these numbers are correct. I was just curious of what to expect, and I'll be happy if there's 8. I'll be happy as well if there's 6 or 16. I just want to go and see if I can tune my deck. So that's part of it, right? So that's the size. The other really interesting thing about awakenings, as this year or this season, is the somewhere in the event cards. Now we know the event cards from the Progenitors Gambit, where, at least in my opinion, had a real impact on which contenders was and wasn't played, and how decks were built to some extent, because that card somewhere in either Des Moines or Quezon City had a gameplay effect. Now that would be really sad, in my opinion. That'd be really sad having that sort of event cards at Awakenings, because the tier level of that, so the entry is sort of the entry, right? It's a tier 1. It's the lowest competitive level at all. So having something that radically changes an aspect of the game put in front of you might come as a surprise for people just joining there. Uh, Instead, somewhere in a local game store, I think it's called. Uh, so there are two. Let's just get that. There are two, and you get, if I understand correctly, one is for the first awakening in a shop, and the other is if they have a second, right? So, and by the way, the leaky teacup will have a second, I think, in October. Don't hold me to that, but there will be a second. So, but in a game store, that that will be in play from the very beginning. I think it's a relic, right? And what it does is that you can tap it, you can exhaust it, sacrifice it, banish it, and draw 2 cards. Now that is a really useful effect, especially if your deck is not super optimized for this. Sort of like a new build, right? Or you're starving for cards, which really is a feel bad moment. Well, then there is somewhere in the event card that sort of can help you out with that. I think that is a really interesting move and a way to tie the Progenitor's Gambit and the high tier gameplay into the local events, right? So if someone like me who is aware of these different tiers, we sort of understand the concept more naturally, where a new player will see this for the first time and be told that this ties into sort of will intuitively understand that too had an impact at the highest level. It feels a little bit more special to me, at least. So points for that. So that makes 2 interesting things. I should have started out, just maybe you don't know, of what the awakening is. So the awakening is the very bottom tier of competitive play, which also means that it's an entry level to this, sort of the gateway into higher dimensions, right, or higher tiers, a portal maybe. Potentially, you could show up if it's an awakening in a small shop. Then you could show up, buy a Clash kit, rip it open, and start playing with that. If you're a really good player, you might do fairly well. You need to be, though, a really good player. But it's also a way to start the honing process of honing your decks and not having the feel bad moments in a more casual play, where you want to play your bigger, more powerful cards. This is your chance, even if your community generally is more casual. Now, that doesn't mean it's every time we talk about someone having more powerful cards, we get this pay to play or pay to win, situation, and or at least debate, right? I don't think for Alpha Clash that's really a thing. If you are in a position where you can actually buy singles, Alpha Clash is fairly cheap, so it isn't that much of an issue, right? It is, and I mentioned this before, TCGs is to some extent a luxury hobby, right? It is not a financially sound hobby, so we need to be aware of that. Anyway, the last point I want to make is whenever I prepare for something, I sort of try to guess. I think everybody does. What environment will I show up in? Now, I have no doubt this is Awakening. I've been talking to some of the people showing up, and the community around Alpha Clash as a whole is super friendly. So I'm not saying that I fear it will not be a friendly environment. I'm very certain there will, and I'm very certain that people will be nice, right? So that's not the thing. What I was thinking of is what is the meta like. Now, for Awakenings, usually if you go for higher tiers, you sort of look at what used to be in play, who else is playing what, right? And that might not be true. One for Alpha Clash, because the game groups are so diverse, but also um, well, there's two other things really. One is that the Progenitor's Gambit, which was just over, right, sort of painted a meta around Krong. But as I mentioned in the last podcast, that might have been driven by other factors. It might have been driven by local factors, and it most certainly have been driven by the somewhere in cards, right? The event cards. Now, the event cards in Awakenings are much, much less impactful, at least in my estimation, so that would have a lesser impact. And since it is the absolute bottom tier, there may very well be a lot of players that doesn't follow along with the high competitive play, right? That doesn't use the weekend to see the finals or the top 8 or something like that. That is not going to play that big of a factor. It might be so that it's more which card do I have, and which contender do I think is fun to play, right? Which one do I feel I can get to work? Just as mentioned last week, what would make a meta, right? So I think that would be the thing. And as again, one of the organizers said, the meta in the local game store there is really, really changing all the time. And I think that might be one of the issues here, right? One of the points here. Those who show up will have built something either interesting or with the cards they have, because that's what we built with, and that will sort of limit or diversify maybe what the field looks like. Now, saying that, I'm realizing that maybe I should have tested with newer contenders my deck with newer contenders than I have. Oh well. Maybe I'll get wiser when I get to Redford next weekend or this weekend. Time will show. So, final thoughts about that is, what do I think will show up? Now, I don't think that the Progenitor's Gambit and what made it there as contenders have a big impact, but I think there will be some. The 3 contenders I think I will meet, at least one or maybe 2 copies of, depending on the size, right? Is one Genesis. I'm very certain that anyone who picks up Genesis will know that Genesis is incredibly strong. He's really a top tier contender, and I do believe that he will show up the Awakening at least 1, maybe 2 decks. If we're 16, I think 2. So I expect that. Death is also a very strong contender with the support she has now. So and very obvious synergies, right? So I expect there to be a death or 2 as well. Also, these are also the ones I will see end up in the top. The third one I think might show up is Major Dean. He has proven to be quite good, and if there are newer players that are used to playing TCGs and therefore doesn't have access to all material like the Awakening cards and Clash Grounds cards, they may choose to go Major Dean, and I do expect someone or few to go Major Dean. Krong is my 4th guess. Krong has always been good. And there might be one that heard about the top 8 being, the top 4, sorry, being Krong only and winning the big tournament, and decide to go Krong. So that would be my guesses of who will show up and dominate at least the attendance list, the participant list. Genesis, Major Dean, Death, and Krong. There might be a wild card in Paul because he shows up, I think, very often and doing quite well. So it might be a dark horse in Paul, but I think the 4 others are the big ones there. Now, what I'm bringing, we'll have to see. I just finished a test game with one from our playgroup and got absolutely hosed by a Magnate deck. So maybe I have to upgrade. Let's see. Anyway, that is it for me for this time. If you are in the UK or not in the UK, but will be at the Awakening next week in the Leaky Teacup, I'll see you there. Be sure to say hi. And yeah, that's it for me. Talk to you later. Bye.